Hello and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Attlas Alex, and today we are making up for last week when we had a untimely interruption right in the middle of our live stream, and we had to go put out fires and personal issues and looking after family, and it never rains but it pours. It was a nurse that was coming to look after my dad, but the blessing of it all was, despite the fact that it disrupted last week's live stream that I had to cancel midstream, which I've never done before. The blessing was that at the very moment that the nurse showed up and that I had to focus on that, I received notifications from Facebook that there was a login to my account from somewhere in Eastern Europe or Ukraine or Russia or wherever it was. I didn't precisely recognize the location, but the location had an Eastern European / Ukrainian / Russian sounding name, right? Some sort of Slavic sort of name. And I immediately had to take steps to change my account password and notify Facebook that wasn't me and all that kind of stuff. Now, I never check messages. I never check Facebook, obviously, when I'm in the middle of a live stream. So, and as you may or may not know, these live streams can go anywhere from an hour and a half to sometimes as long as 4 hours. Had I gone 2 or 3 or 4 hours not having checked that notification, not having received that notification, there is a very good chance, in fact, most likely, my account would have been hacked, and I might have even been locked out of it, like I was my old account, my old Attlas Alex account, which to this day has 10,000 followers, whom I cannot communicate with, whom I cannot access in any way, because my account was hacked and I was locked out of my account by Facebook because the hackers did some nefarious activity using my account as the source of, who knows, spamming or doing whatever nefarious activity that they did on Instagram. And my account, they did it through my linked Instagram account on my old Attlas Alex Facebook account. And Facebook locked me out of the account. And the hackers changed my password anyway. So you can't unlock an account. There's no way for me to unlock the account. And then, anyway, that's a long story. I told that story ages ago when that happened. But because I had been through it once, I was at risk of going through that again. And so me having to cancel the live stream midstream due to the nurse being late a good, more than half an hour late, 45 minutes late, well more than 45 minutes. Because of that, I was forced to cancel. And because I was not doing a live stream, I was able to pay attention to the notifications I was getting from Facebook that there are suspicious logins from a completely different part of the world. Now, what's strange is that these companies seem to be so security crazy, and yet their system is like, well, we'll send them a notification, and in that notification it says, if this was you, you don't have to do anything. And that's all well and good, like but you're assuming that people get their notifications right away, and that people can devote their attention to you right away. But that's how narcissistic these tech companies are. They assume that your every waking moment and every waking breath, you're glued to your phone. And then if your phone sends you a notification, that's your first and only priority, is to see what the phone says, to see what Facebook says. Oh, I heard the Facebook ping. I have to react like a Pavlovian dog. That's how narcissistic these tech companies are. And unfortunately, for many people, they are shackled to their phone. For many people, their phone is like an appendage. They have become cybernetic organisms. And so by and large, that method of security works. But for someone like me, I'm not shackled to my phone. I'm not a Pavlovian, trained, conditioned intellectual animal that starts to salivate when I hear the Facebook notification bell go off. I hear it. Yeah, okay. They can wait. It can wait. Whatever it is I'm in the middle of doing, that's what I'm focused and concentrated on. If I'm speaking to somebody, if I'm on a live stream, I turn all the notifications off. I put my phone on do not disturb. So I don't even know, I don't even know what notifications I may or may not be getting. And I turn Facebook off the computer and everything else, because, if I'm sharing my screen and I'm sharing the sound on the screen, then all the more reason, right, to turn all this stuff off, so it doesn't become a distraction, so it doesn't become an interruption. But unfortunately, the security measures are completely useless for someone like me, because I don't react immediately when my phone tells me to. My life does not revolve around this little piece of plastic, glass, and silicon, because that's all it is. It's a tool, but it's a tool that I use. I am not something to be used by it and its masters. The narcissists who create these tech companies and then expect our worlds to revolve around what they do via these little windows into our lives and these little portals, doorways, mirrors into our consciousness, into our psyche, that these tech companies exploit. They reach in with their cybernetic mechanical hands and they grab and they take everything they can get. First and foremost, our attention, our consciousness. These tech companies and these devices are exactly external manifestations of what mechanical nature is doing internally to our psyche, our egos, which are exploiting our psychology and stealing our consciousness and stealing our energy and exploiting whatever they can get their hands on, because that's the nature of mechanical nature. It's called the conservation of energy. Maximize gains and minimize losses. That's how nature works. That's how mechanical nature works. And the egos, the narcissistic egos that created Facebook and created Google and created all these so-called miraculous technologies, they designed them and created them to exploit and harness and hypnotize and turn us and our consciousness into slaves of the technology, of their technology, which then they on the other side siphon, right? Technology is just a consciousness harvesting tool for them, right? And your personal data and all the rest of it. We all know the business case for these things. So as disruptive as it was last week, the fact that I had to cancel midstream, it was actually a kind of a life-saving because we do rely on social media and technology these days, especially right now for Attlas Conscious Arts and the campaign that I'm running. And of course, to be able to do these live streams and simulcast them on Facebook, where a lot of the connections that I have are. So it is a valuable tool, right? It can be used as a tool. And unfortunately, many bad actors in the world want to hijack our accounts. And as I said, I've had an account hijacked and then locked down and been locked out of it by Facebook because of the nefarious activity that these individuals use my account for. So if I had not canceled the live stream midstream, I would not have received the notification in time. And who knows what damage those bad actors could have done to or through my account. And then I might have had a second account locked down and locked out and would have had to begin all over again from scratch, from nothing. So that's the short version of why what happened last week had to happen. As again, as disruptive and in the moment unpleasant it was, it's actually quite encouraging. It's quite encouraging to know the lengths to which our own Divine Mother will go to create circumstances that have our best interests at heart. But in the moment, it certainly didn't seem that way. In the moment when I had to cancel the live stream midstream because the nurse showed up late to take care of my dad, and I had to go and fulfill my responsibilities there. In that moment, it seemed like the universe was against me because of the disruption, because of having to cancel a show live, which I've never done. And I would normally, under normal circumstances, I would never do. But last week, that particular day, the circumstances were engineered to force me to have to put an end to the show midstream, so that a greater catastrophe could be averted. And this is something that very often in our lives, even if we're, aspirants on the path, we may not appreciate in the moment. That very often, let's say we're trying to get from A to B, and it doesn't matter if you're driving or trying to catch a train or plane or whatever the case may be, and you are delayed for some reason. There's a holdup. And this holdup is not of your doing. It could be traffic. It could be a problem on the train system, right? The subway system or the train system. There could be a derailment, or there could be, I don't know, an animal on the tracks holding up the train. Or obviously, if you're flying, there are any number of reasons why flights can be delayed. And we all know what that feels like when we're trying to get somewhere on time. We have a deadline to meet. We have a schedule to keep, or we have a particular time that we need to arrive at. And now life has thrown this obstacle in our path. And we're at the mercy of life. We're at the mercy of circumstances. You can't make the traffic jam in front of you go away. You can't make the airline speed up whatever it is they're doing in order to get over the flight delay. Right? If there's a giant moose or something, or a grizzly bear asleep on the tracks, you're not going to make that grizzly bear get up and get off the tracks and let the train keep going, right? Unless you offer yourself up as a meal to the grizzly bear, and that's probably counterproductive to the fact that you're trying to get somewhere. So sometimes we meet an immovable object, the obstacle. But we are aspirants on the path. We are on a spiritual journey, which means we are motivated from within by the fire and the light and the knowledge that our path is important, and that our destination and the milestones that we have to reach along that path are meaningful. I mean, you might get stressed out even if you're just taking a vacation, or you're going to, you're trying to get to a birthday party or something, and you run into an obstacle, you run into a delay. That might be stressful in and of itself. But what I'm referring to is those situations that people on the spiritual path, by and large, we do everything quite intentionally and quite consciously. And very often there are other people's well-being at stake. We have responsibilities to fulfill. We have made commitments. We have made promises. We have said that we would be somewhere at a certain time in order to do something for others. Not always, but very often, those of us on the spiritual path who take the path seriously, when we are going somewhere, very often it's because we have committed ourselves to others, which is very often what spiritual aspirants do. It's how we live our life. It's the longer we are on this path, the less and less and less it becomes about us. The less and less and less it becomes about me. It's not about me, right? I don't take several hours every week to do this live stream, right? Just for my shits and giggles. Although it is also for my benefit, and I freely admit that, and I've said that many, many, many times, that this for me is practice. And this is an opportunity for me to be spontaneous and allow the knowledge, the information to flow through me in a new, novel, and unexpected way, because none of this is premeditated in any real sense. It's not planned, it's not scripted. And so this is all practice for me. So in that sense, it is for my benefit. But ultimately, that benefit to me is to become better at doing this, to become a better conduit, a better messenger of the information. So it's ultimately for others. I'm living my life. I've devoted my life to this task. And so, yes, there's a benefit to me to make me a better teacher, to make me a better instructor, a better guide, a better consultant, a better whatever, a better media. No, I'm not going to use that word. A better vessel and messenger for the truth and the light, which is for the benefit of others. And the light, the fire that burns inside of us, that force that beckons us, it calls to us, it called us to this path in the first place, right? Nobody egotistically suddenly decides one day, oh, I'm going to devote myself to the spiritual path. It's a calling. We are called to it. It pulls us. And of course, that calling comes from within. And the pull is from within. The pull is towards our higher self, our true self. But when we make contact there, in however small little moment of clarity, these moments of these little awakening moments, now that becomes a force, and there's something that we are called to do in the world by way of being done. That force, right? We start switching from being a human doing to a human being, and more importantly, a human being done. That force which called us to the path is now acting upon us and through us. And just as that initial pull, which called us to the path in the first place, however old we were, wherever we were in our life, whatever it was, whatever station in life that we had, whatever it was we were doing, it's unique and different for each and every one of us, and how we were called, and the calling that we are here to perform, the duty, the service, our purpose for being, our mission in life, our calling. We actually call it that, right? What's your calling in life? What are you called to do? Some people's calling in life is to be an artist. Others are calling in life is to be a musician. Others are to be an engineer. Others are to be a doctor or a lawyer or who knows. But that calling, the force behind that calling, and when you answer the call, that force is now moving you, right? It moves you in your life. It moves you further down that path toward the ultimate expression of your calling. We call it destiny. That force is irresistible. That is the irresistible force. And I say that with supreme confidence, because you would not be here right now in this moment if it were anything other than an irresistible force that's guiding you, that's calling you, that's telling you, hey, take a few hours out of your Sunday afternoon and listen to that schleb on YouTube. But more so, far greater, is the irresistible pull and the irresistible force in your life, in your calling, what you are called to do each and every moment of every day, and how you are called to service for the sake of others, for the sake of the betterment of humanity, and for the sake of the end of suffering of all beings. Whatever it is your calling is, it's irresistible to you. There's nothing else that compares. You can have pleasures, you can have distractions, you can have thrills and chills and all kinds of stuff that give you a momentary respite or distraction or but it's momentary, it's fleeting, it's passing. But your calling always brings you back. It's always there. It never really goes away. And when you examine your life, you discover that nothing else compares, with the exception of perhaps your spouse, your family, your children. But again, if they were a part of your calling to be a parent, to be a good parent and raise children properly, and to be a loving husband or a loving wife, to be a loving spouse, or to be a loving partner, if that's part of your calling, then of course it's going to be on par, because it's a part of your calling. It's going to be irresistible to you. Your family, your children, the well-being of your extended family, whatever, if that's part of your calling, then nothing else can compare. And that's why we have these responsibilities and we have these priorities. And our calling in life is one of those priorities because it's an irresistible force. And that irresistible force is our innermost intimate Christ. It's the cosmic Christ. It's the Christos. It's the fire of fire and the light of lights. It is the lightning bolts that Zeus hurls down from Mount Olympus, the Hey Zeus of Zeus, the power of God in activity, in action. It is the kinetic force of the will of the Almighty in the absolute. It is the force which burns at the heart of every star. That fusion reaction, which, well, it expresses on the material plane in that, what we call that fusion reaction, that gives off a seemingly unlimited source of heat and light so that it gives life to an entire solar system. And then you look to the center of our galaxy and the super mega cluster of stars at the center of the Milky Way, which radiates resplendent light, love, and energy and gives life to an entire galaxy. That is all the Christ. That is all the Christos. And our innermost, intimate, individuated spark of that force moving through us in our life, that is irresistible to us. That is the irresistible force. So for anyone on the spiritual path You feel your innermost intimate Christ that called you to this path, and you had to answer. You did answer. The proof is in the pudding. You're here now. And you know you answered. And you know that if you tried to walk away, your conscience wouldn't let you. You would be dragged back into it because there's nothing else out there for you that can come close to the fulfillment, to the peace, the happiness, the joy that you experience when you are in alignment with and working with and allowing that irresistible force to work in you and through you to do some great work that is your calling, your purpose for being here in the world. That's an irresistible force. So when you're living your life and you're trying to get somewhere, or you're trying to do something, and most of all, you're trying to fulfill your calling, you're doing something that you know beyond any shadow of a doubt that it's 100% aligned with your calling. And then what? You run into the unmovable object, the obstacle, the traffic jam, the delayed flight, the delayed train, the derailed train, or the technical issues, or the scheduling issues, or whatever it is. Now, all of a sudden, you're here motivated by the irresistible force, and you've come up against an immovable object. Christ can't clear that traffic jam. Christ can't put the train back on the tracks. And Christ can't get them to reverse the decision to delay the flight. Or maybe he could, but he doesn't. Our individual divine mother, the feminine aspect of the Christ, because Christ is androgynous, male and female, but the feminine aspect within us, our own individual divine mother, that is here to see to it that the Christ is able to be born into the world through us, right? That's the divine mother's role. She gives birth to the Christ in the world. That's her role. That's the Virgin Mary. And it's also Mary Magdalene. Because Jesus, the man, becomes Jesus, the God-man, by working in the forge of Vulcan, in the alchemical bedchambers between spouses in sexual alchemy. So whether it's the Virgin Mary, Mother of God, or it's Mary Magdalene, the wife of Jesus, it doesn't matter. It's the same allegory. It's the same symbol. It's the feminine force that gives birth to the Christ. There's no getting around that. And our Divine Mother is who arranges everything that we need on our path in order to fulfill our destiny, which is to bring the utmost, ultimate expression of our innermost intimate Christ and birth it into the world. It's called our destiny, our purpose for being. And it's irresistible. But then we meet an immovable object. And what happens to us? We go batshit crazy, don't we? It drives us absolutely mental. It's like, oh my God, it's like, no, I have to give this talk, or I promise this, or I have this responsibility there. Or this is my journey, this is my path. I can't let God down. I'm letting God down. It's not my fault. I can't do anything about it. But Jesus, I got to do something, right? Quick, abandon the car. Go, run around and go, do or drive on the shoulder at 55 miles an hour on the shoulder, risking life and limb and everybody else to get around that traffic jam, or pull off the highway and take the back streets and try to get Google Maps to guide you around this traffic jam and try to catch another flight or try to catch another train, or we scramble, we do everything in our power to try to get back on track, back on our path, to not let down our innermost intimate Christ, to because it's irresistible, that force. It's irresistible to us. And our ego knows it. And our ego will exploit that. The fact that the irresistible force is irresistible to us, the ego knows it. And there's that immovable object. So you know that expression. What happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object? It's a quote that appears at the end of The Dark Knight. The Joker says it to Batman when Batman's got him caught and he's hanging upside down, right? And he's swaying in the wind. And Christopher Nolan does this neat trick where he turns the camera upside down. So the Joker is hanging upside down, but he's right side up. And his hair and his jacket and everything, it's all crazy because he's swaying back and forth. And he says, this must be what they mean when they say, what happens when the irresistible force meets an immovable object. I think you and I are destined to do this forever. And right there, we see the Dark Knight and his Joker, his Lucifer, right? Having that conversation where we're destined to do this forever, where the irresistible force meets this immovable object. This is destined to happen to us. So why does this happen? I explained at the beginning last week, why did it happen that I had to cancel the live stream? I had to cancel the live stream, and I was met with that immovable object, and I had to cancel, which was one of the hardest decisions to make, but I had to do it. And because I did, I was able to avert an even greater catastrophe, which would have derailed the campaign, Attend for Human 3.0. It would have derailed so many things and would have prevented me from doing another live stream this week on Facebook. I would have been on YouTube only, unless I could get everything set back up. But then but you wouldn't be notified on Facebook anymore because I would be locked out of my account, and I would have no way of notifying you that I was locked out of my account because we wouldn't be friends anymore. And I don't have everybody's names memorized of who I'm friends with on Facebook or who follows me. Because remember, people who follow Attlas Alux, they just follow. I don't have those people memorized, and I have no way of reaching out to them in any other capacity. Because I can have lots of followers who I don't communicate one-to-one with. It's just like that. I lost contact with the 10,000 followers I had on my old Attlas Alux account. So the immovable object, when the irresistible force hits it, it's this catastrophe. It's like psychologically for us, because the ego is exploiting the superficial, myopic view And it's exploiting the fact that we have this irresistible force inside of us. And it's exploiting the circumstance of this immovable object, this obstacle that has now hindered us on our path. And the ego is going to exploit that and get us to go batshit crazy and stress out and freak out and do everything. Why? Because the ego gets to siphon off all of that nervous, stressful, angry, frustrated, or depressed energy. Like, however we end up feeling negative about the fact that we're here trying to do our work, our work for God, our work of our innermost Christ, the irresistible force that we were called to, that's our calling in life. And it's just obstacle after obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, and delay after delay after delay, and failure after failure after failure. And each time it can be very disheartening. It can be very difficult. It can be very discouraging, in fact. And all of that is a construct, is a grift, is a lie of the false self. Because what happens when the irresistible force meets the immovable object is precisely the opposite of discouragement. But in the moment when it's happening to us, we don't see it that way because of how clever and how subtle and how quick the ego is to leap, to pounce like a predatory feline, like a praying mantis. Have you ever seen a praying mantis snatch a grasshopper? It's unbelievable. You can't see it happen. There's you put a grasshopper into the praying mantis's cage. The praying mantis is just sitting there. It's not doing anything. It's just it, but he's got these eyes, right? And they do, you know, and the grasshopper is just going apeshit, batshit crazy. Because he knows. The grasshopper knows, right? And just it's going like this and like this, and all of a sudden it stops. And you look, and the praying mantis is eating the grasshopper like corn on the cob. You didn't even see it happen. From the praying mantis's point of view, he's like, and he reaches out and casually goes out this and just grabs the grasshopper. The grasshopper's going like 1,000 miles a minute. He's doing everything that he can, right, to make himself difficult to catch. But the mantis is just like, it's just casual. It just goes out and does this. And from our perspective, we didn't see anything happen, right? You got to catch it on camera and then slow motion. You can see it happening in slow motion, 1,000 frames per second or whatever. That's how fast and clever and quick our mechanical egos are to spring into action on us like a mousetrap, right? It's because they're set. Egos set themselves and they wait like a spider in a web or like a praying mantis on a twig. It's just waiting for something to come by, right? Some unsuspecting, grasshopper or whatever, to just reach out and grab it. Or like a cat that's stalking its prey. And how patient is a cat, and how slow and quiet and completely focused. And this is what a predator is. Now, if you combine the predator with the parasite, you get like the tick in the woods. Well, the tick in the woods is just sitting there. It's just waiting for something to come along that can leap up and latch onto, right? And then it immediately burrows into the fur and into the skin under the fur. And bingo, now he's set for life. that tick, because he's got this big fat juicy deer or dog or person or whoever to gorge himself on blood now. So the tick is the parasite is now in his favorite spot. So we are made to feel discouraged when the irresistible force meets the immovable object. The discouragement we feel is the egos pouncing on us. The frustration, the stress, the anxiety, all the reactions that we have when we are trying to do God's work, when we are trying to do the work of our path, when we are trying to fulfill our calling, our destiny, and then boom, something gets in the way, like it did last week. And the reality is it was the best thing that could have happened in that moment, was for me to cancel that live show. It was protecting my calling. It was protecting my destiny. It was in my favor. Everything that was going down was in my favor, and by extension, in your favor. I would not be here today, now, doing this talk. You would not be here now listening to this talk, because there would have been no way for you to be notified of it, because our connection would have been lost on Facebook. You wouldn't have known that. Just like the 10,000 followers of my other account, they don't know that I'm locked out of that account. All they know is that he's not posting anymore. And people forget. People, it's not like people wait with bated breath to see what I have to say next. So they just forget about it, and they just lose, they've gone on with their lives or whatever. But Facebook doesn't send your followers a message saying, "Hey, this person you were following here, we've had to close, we had to shut that account down." So it would have been catastrophic had my present account that this is streaming on, had this been shut down. And again, how can one look at that? The facts. Because these are the objective facts now. Subjectively, in the moment, when it was happening, it was, oh man, it was like, damn, that nurse is late, and why couldn't she be on time, and this and that and the other thing, and right? And it was, in the moment, it was frustrating because I was trying to do my live stream, and I had people watching and waiting for the live stream to progress. And I had to come back and say, listen, I have to cancel. I let all those people down. And you know how that feels. Because anybody on the spiritual path, any genuine aspirant of the truth and light and love, there is nothing that we loathe more than letting people down. Because the spiritual path is all about living for others and lifting people up. And so letting people down is the antithesis of why we're here. And so nothing gets to us more than that. And the ego knows it. Our egos know it. And so you can imagine it, you can think of it like a mousetrap or a praying mantis or another, like a kind of a predator, or some kind of like mechanical trap, or like in Indiana Jones when he's going to get the golden idol and all the traps that are set up, right? It's kind of like that. The egos know what is truly irresistible. And they will stake out that space, waiting for their opportunity to pounce when we are motivated by that irresistible force and then meet the immovable object. And that's their cue. That's when they pounce. And that's what ultimately, if that happens, keeps happening to us, then we run the risk of falling into discouragement and getting discouraged. And believe me, I speak from experience because I've been around for, over 50 years, and I've been pursuing my life's work, like actively, consciously, for 35 of those 50 years. Because I named Attlas Arts back when I was 15. I was missing the conscious piece. But Attlas Arts is how it appeared to me at that time, because I had to go into university for English and drama and so on. So Attlas Arts was how I was being directed in that direction. But for 35 years, every time I was given a direction and shown to do something, and I followed that direction, following the irresistible force, boom, I hit an immovable object. And time and time and time again, it was either a failed business or a client who cheated me, or a failed relationship, or any number of like what seemed like mini disasters or mini catastrophes. But each and every one sent me in a new direction, and each and every one resulted in a change within me and an expansion of my experiential knowledge. So, like water through a river, or even better, water going through a series of baffles, I was in every way, shape, and form on the right path and in perfect alignment with my calling. And each and every one of those obstacles were put there on purpose, specifically to redirect me and force me to go around, or to go over, or to reorient, or to cause me to swirl into a spiral of some kind, which, as you know, creates structured living water. It makes water more alive. It makes better water. There's that expression, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So when you look in retrospect, in hindsight, or in meditation, and you meditate upon these obstacles and these incidents where the irresistible force meets the immovable object and resulted in a freak out in the moment or discouragement. But if you widen your view and you widen your scope and you see the benefit and the actual results, the actual outcome of that apparent obstacle and that apparent disruption, and you discover that, well, actually, if that hadn't occurred, I would have gone off a cliff. So that obstacle, that disruption, was to my benefit. And and nothing is by chance, that was arranged that way and was arranged by my divine mother. That comprehension, that awareness can lead to nothing but encouragement. Because that's a very encouraging fact. And it is something that we really do need to take to heart and in our own life through examination of our own circumstances. Generally speaking, people on the spiritual path, generally speaking, given enough time and distance from the event, from the circumstance, their intuition is usually well enough developed that they come to realize. And that's why even average people, right? The reason why we have that cliche that says hindsight is 2020 is because even regular folk who are not, particularly pursuing a spiritual path of any note, right? They don't. We have to understand that the average person, day to day, does not go through their life thinking about their destiny, thinking about their calling and their meaning and purpose for being. This is actually a unique way of living life from the totality of humanity's perspective. Most people are just going through mechanically the day-to-day functions and operations of their life. They're going to work, and then they're entertaining themselves, their family, their friends, and so on and so forth. And they're planning, right? They're planning their next vacation, and they're doing their taxes, and right, all that stuff, the day-to-day stuff. And most of them are just thinking about where their next little little pleasure is going to come from, or their next source of distraction is going to come from. Most people do not spend their waking hours or their evening hours, and if they do meditate, they're just meditating to chill out and to relieve their stress. They're not using meditation to receive insights or guidance or into what they should be doing next in their life or what they need to be doing now in their life. But even they, after something bad happens, when they look back, for them it might take months, it might take years, right? Or it might even take them growing up and becoming adults themselves to be able to look back on something that happened in their childhood and then say, oh, okay, I understand now why my parents did that. Because I'm a parent now and I have children, and I can now finally understand, because I'm a parent now, I can finally understand why my parents denied me A, B, C, X, Y, Z, which made me so resentful towards them. And I was carrying that resentment my entire life because my parents were so hard on me. Now I'm a parent, and now I see what happens with my kids, and I'm like, okay, now I understand why my parents were so hard on me. And boy, oh boy, am I glad they were so hard on me. And they showed me that kind of tough love. Because, you look at the younger generations now, and they're completely freaking useless. They're adult children because they were coddled and they were, and all the rest of it, right? They weren't shown complete love. They were only shown one side of love. Right? But they themselves don't understand that yet. They might not even understand it ever. It might take them years and years and years in therapy before they figure it out. that life is hard, and the fact that their parents weren't hard on them when they were young meant that they weren't properly prepared for life. And maybe my parents were a little bit harder on me than most, but guess what? Look at the life that I've chosen to live. Look at my destiny. Look at my calling. I know what's out there in the world waiting for me. I know how it will react to the truth. But I've been well prepared for it precisely because of not just what my parents put me through, but what my divine mother put me through. All those obstacles, all that irresistible force slamming into those immovable objects. And becoming experienced and familiar and comfortable is not the right word, but familiar with that process. And the time that it takes between in the moment being ambushed by the egos, taking advantage of that moment of obstruction, and the egos pounce, right? And it's like a praying mantis. It's so fast. Okay, those particular egos are gonna leap because they are the opportunists. They're waiting for just this moment to happen. So it's not necessary that you're going to be able to get out in front of them and preempt and prevent them from making you have a freak out in the moment. But the more you comprehend, the more you are aware of the bigger picture, and the more this happens to you, the more experienced you become, the more you realize, okay, these obstacles show up for a reason, and so the distance between you having your freak out and facing frustration and discouragement to coming to an awareness of, this actually was the best thing that could have happened to me. That distance gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. So yeah, in the moment, you might have your little freak out, you might have your little stress out, but it lasts moments instead of days or weeks, or in the case of normal folk, right, years or decades before they're able to look back in hindsight and get it and say, actually, that was the best thing that could have happened to me. For those of us on the spiritual path, we want to get that distance down so that in the moment, even as those egos are freaking out and doing their thing, we are fast enough to just observe that and say, yeah, okay, there's the egos freaking out. There's the stress, there's the anxiety, there's the frustration. These are the seeds of discouragement, but I know better. I'm going to let the egos have the little freak out, and I'm going to observe that. I'm just going to sit there and calmly observe my egos freaking out. My heart rate going up, my brow starting to sweat, my hands shaking, my legs shaking, whatever it is, right? That you, as you observe your three brains, your heart, mind, and body, wherever the egos, however they tend to freak out when the irresistible force meets an immovable object, and they're pouncing and they're attacking, they're trying to exploit the situation. You're going to feel that emotionally, mentally, right, and physiologically in some way. However that is expressing itself in you, you can sit back and you can observe it, and none of it will get to you. You will not get discouraged. In fact, you will be encouraged. You will be living in encouragement, because the ego that we're talking about here, that's freaking out when the irresistible force meets the immovable object, There are two main egos that are freaking out. The first is pride, specifically mystic pride. And the second is fear, the desire to control and the desire to control outcomes. And it's fear and pride working in tandem. And then anger and frustration is born of the fear and pride using the circumstance to take advantage of the fact that things aren't going our way, right? According to our calling, according to our destiny, according to our beliefs about our calling in this moment. I'm going to this retreat. I'm leading a retreat. I'm opening a retreat. I'm leading a retreat. I need to be there. There's going to be a dozen people waiting at the retreat center for me, and my flight is delayed. And if my flight is delayed in Toronto, I'm going to miss my connecting flight in, wherever, Los Angeles or whatever. And I'm not going to make it to Bali in time to be there for the beginning of the retreat. And so the egos love that. The fear. Oh my God, what's going to happen? What are they going to say? What are these people going to do? They're going to be showing up at the retreat center, and then, oh my God, no, you know what? I'm going to be so late. They're going to go off and start doing ayahuasca or something else. All right, they're going to go and they're going to go partying, or they're going to do psychedelics or whatever because the sensei, the teacher, the retreat, the person who ran the retreat that they paid money for didn't show up. Right? They're gonna like, fear is going to start concocting all of these fantasies around what are they going to do and what are they going to say and what's going to happen, and my God, it's the end of the world because things aren't going our way. The outcome was not what we wanted, and that's control, the control side of fear. And then mystic pride is there because this is our calling and we are being prevented from being on the path. And so what does that do to our mystic pride and our self-grandiosity around how important we are? Because we're doing this important work in life. We're here to fulfill this calling. We're doing God's work and we're being prevented from doing it. Oh my God, right? And then anger and frustration is born out of this fear and desire for control and mystic pride. Fear and anger and frustration blossoms out of that, and then you get all the physiological symptoms, et cetera, et cetera. And that can lead to discouragement, right? Discouragement is fear and defeat. Because the root word of encouragement, the root word is courage. And courage, obviously, is the opposite of fear. And courage is what it takes to overcome fear. So when the irresistible force meets the immovable object, and in the moment, fear is ambushing us, what's going to get us through and over that is courage. We face that fear in the moment, but also the encouragement from the fact that we've been here before, we've faced such obstacles in the past, and in hindsight, they turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to us. and that it was a necessary detour along the path. You've probably heard the expression, on the spiritual journey, sometimes the delays work in your favor. And that's very often the case. That flight that was delayed, maybe it was delayed because of a mechanical problem. Had it not been delayed, the plane might have gone down. There have been cases where people have missed their flights because traffic jams or whatever, the taxi didn't get them there on time, or who knows, right? But they ran into some delay, prevented them from getting to the airport on time, or they had a problem with their passport, or they had a problem, some other problem, and they were prevented from getting on the plane on time. That plane ended up crashing, and everybody on the plane was killed. And that individual would have been killed along with everybody else were it not for the delay. And so you will find story after story after story after story like this. This is such a universal experience. Now, it's not always about airplanes crashing, but if you read biographies or you watch documentaries or biofilms, very often these sorts of scenarios end up getting told and getting played because they're so magical, they're so serendipitous. And yet, in the moment when you're trying to catch that flight, every single delay, you're cussing and you're cursing and you're freaking out and you're yelling at people and whatever. It's like, I gotta get that flight. So there's something very encouraging about it. In hindsight, that person sitting in the airport with his hands, his head in his hands, completely defeated, completely discouraged. I missed my flight. I'm not going to get the job, or I'm not going to get the contract, or I'm going to lose this client, or I'm going to lose, whatever it is, or I'm not going to make it to, the wedding on time, or, whatever. And then moments later, he looks up and he sees on the news, flight, 787 has crashed on takeoff. And it just, he looks up at the screen, and he looks down at his ticket, and he looks up at the screen, he looks down at his ticket, and he says, and then he goes, and then what? Either he thinks he's the luckiest bastard alive, which might be his first impulse, or he drops to his knees and he starts praying and thanking God for not letting him get on that plane, for doing everything in his power to delay and block and obstruct him from getting on that plane. And for those of us on the spiritual path, we remember our Divine Mother and we turn within and we remember amazing grace. The grace of God, the grace of our Divine Mother. That's the feminine aspect of Christ that furnishes us with all that we need in order for us to fulfill our destiny, to fulfill our calling, to answer the call. And sometimes answering the call means being prevented from it, from doing it, being obstructed and being blocked. And that's very encouraging. It's very encouraging to know that our Divine Mother will go to such great lengths through the severity of love to put us through such discomfort and hardship and momentary stress and anxiety and anger and frustration and fear in order that we can continue and fulfill our calling in the long term. Short-term pain for long-term gain. It's very encouraging to know that. So we've been going for very nearly an hour. No, sorry, more than an hour. And we had a couple comments and we better get to them. Tiffany says, most excellent introduction to today. I could feel that one. Well, I'm glad for that. And Benjamin Ochoa says, is Da'at in some way connected to the inner self, you think? Well, yes, Da'at is gnosis. It's knowledge. It's self-evident experiential knowledge. It's what the inner self seeks and is what the inner self works with. Gnosis or Da'at is the meta mind of being. In other words, well, I don't know how else to say it, right? The vehicle, we have mind. We also have intellect, but we have our mind, which is in the fifth dimension. Da'at is in the seventh dimension, or it's in both the sixth and seventh dimension. It straddles the two. It's multidimensional. But that is the mind of our innermost being, and it's the mind of Christ. It's what people refer to as Christ consciousness, is what Da'at exists in. So it's in the world of archetypes and how those archetypes express in and through our innermost being, which then has to find its translation through our mind and our intellect into our words and works in this dimension, the third dimension. So there's step layers going down, levels going down. So not only is Da'at connected to the inner self in some way, but it's an intimate connection. It's an intimate relation. Now, that's all well and good, everything that I've said so far about obstacles and the irresistible force meeting an immovable object. And remember how I said we want to reduce the distance so that our conscious awareness and our encouragement when faced with an immovable object and a disruptive obstruction, an obstacle, overlaps so that we can watch our fear and pride and anger and frustration and everything else playing itself out, but we can sit in observance of it and saying, okay, those are the terrorists, right? There's the praying mantis, there's the predator and the parasites trying to take advantage of this moment, and they're pouncing and leaping on me to take advantage of this moment because they know how irresistible the force of my calling and destiny is. But there is a circumstance, like when we face an obstacle, an immovable object, and we face it with the irresistible force of our momentum, our forward momentum toward our destiny, that the distance between the incident and our egos attacking us, which they do it with lightning speed because they're mechanical, right? It's like a mousetrap. It's literally like a mousetrap. You're not going to get out in front of a mousetrap, but you can maybe, right? Like, not be identified or attached. So when the mousetrap snaps, you're not caught up in it, and you can sit back and, right? You don't become discouraged. You remain encouraged. But there is a case when to remain fleet-footed and fast requires us to assume a different approach or a different tactic. And that case is when we are dealing with people. You know the type of people that I'm talking about. The type of people who are completely mechanical or atheistic or dogmatic and close-minded. They're set in their ways, they're preconditioned, they're totally hypnotized, whatever the case may be. You're trying to reach them, you're trying to help them, or you're just trying to convey even the most basic, simplest information. And they throw up their defenses. And the word for this is cognitive dissonance, where the truth represents such a disturbance to their identity, to their existential state of being, because they are so attached, they're so identified and attached to their beliefs and to their erroneous beliefs, to the lies that they've been taught, told, conditioned to believe, or that they themselves, of their own free will, have decided defines who they are, either consciously or subconsciously. And that the truth is a threat to them, is an existential threat to them, because the truth threatens to shatter their false beliefs. But those false beliefs constitute their identity in some way. And they're so attached to them, it's like an appendage. It's like having an arm cut off or a leg cut off or their head cut off. So cognitive dissonance is a fear and a pride reaction. Because pride being identity, right? The I, the false self. And fear, the existential threat, the algorithm, the self-preservation instinct. And I don't have to embellish this too much. You have had conversations like this. You have people in your life like this, probably family members who don't understand you. They don't approve of the path that you've chosen, and they don't want to understand. They refuse to even try because they know that you're batshit crazy. Anybody and everybody on the spiritual path has at least one person like this in their life who, for all intents and purposes, should be standing behind you. And maybe they do to one degree or another, but really deep down, they don't understand your path. They don't want to understand your path, and they don't, and they certainly not going to listen to anything you have to say. And trying to deal with such people, whether they're people you know, whether they're people in your family, or whether they're just people you meet on the street or in your travels, and you can tell that they're living a lie and they're living their life based on erroneous beliefs, and you're trying to help them to expand their knowledge, or to help them to see themselves, to know themselves, to observe themselves, recognize that all their suffering is coming from within, and how they're reacting to the world around them instead, but they're still just lost in blaming the world, or whatever the case may be. But they're trapped in mechanicity, they're trapped in duality, they're trapped in the binary mechanistic egos, and they're suffering. But you can't get them to see it. And your attempts, your overtures to reach them are rebuked with such force, possibly even force of malice. In other words, rebuked with prejudice. This is a case where the irresistible force is meeting an immovable object. And we all know that depending on the individual that we're dealing with, it's very likely that we feel an irresistible force to help them. Because now we're not talking about catching a plane or, and being somewhere on time. We're talking about guiding somebody in their life, and possibly, getting them on a new footing, getting them in the right direction. So there's a lot riding on us fulfilling our task, because everyone who's an aspirant of the truth, of the light, of love, on some level, we are a representative of that truth, light, and love, because we are here on the path trying to birth our innermost intimate Christ into the world through ourselves, through our thoughts, our words, our deeds. That makes us mortals the three-dimensional representative of our innermost intimate Christ. We are the character that is representing our innermost player in the game world. So a lot is riding on our performance. And because we don't live life for ourselves, we live it for others. Here's an other. Clearly they're hypnotized. Clearly they're ignorant. Clearly they're suffering. How can I help them? And that irresistible force is moving us in the direction to help them. And this is the beginning of that horrible, terrible, awful confrontations that we have with individuals who are suffering from cognitive dissonance. And they become like the traffic jam. They become like the delayed flight, the derailed train, the obstacle that will not budge, the hard-headed, closed-minded, they will not waver, they will not budge. There is no reaching them. And how that makes us feel and how we respond, how the irresistible force becomes this almost like this pseudo desperation to reach them. Otherwise, we're a failure. We're going to be letting down God and letting this person down if we don't reach them, if we don't get through to them. Or we just so desperately want them just to see, like, just a crack, a sliver of the light. But they won't. Now, in one way, shape, or form, we've all been there. We've all experienced this. And again, the degree to which the intensity of this confrontation and the results of that confrontation, how it unfolds or explodes, it's different for everyone. But there's a predictable outcome. And I'm sure you've experienced that outcome more than once, if not regularly in your life. And yeah, it can be very discouraging being surrounded by people who not only do they not know, they do not know what they do not know, to steal a line from Samael and Wayor, but they don't want to know. They're completely happy in their ignorance, despite the fact that they believe they know everything. They're completely happy in that belief that they know all there is to know, or they know everything that there is to know up to now. And what hasn't been discovered yet, well, they'll discover that eventually. And who the hell are you to tell me otherwise? It can be very discouraging to be surrounded by people like that. And when you encounter people like that, and even if you start the conversation off and the conversation is going, great, it's a great direction, but then a topic is broached. And you're trying to continue the conversation in a civil way, continuing along with the newly introduced topic, but it just becomes, like the buffalo butting heads, right? And we all have been there. And it could be parents, it could be siblings, it could be spouses, it could be friends, it could be coworkers, or complete strangers, or people online. But this is most acute when it's in person. Although people online can get very passionate and very and they really can go at each other because they have that benefit of some pseudo anonymity there. But in the flesh, it's always more intense one-on-one because you have the morphogenetic field and you have the actual vital the vital energies are commingling, and the egos can conspire with one another within that space, and those energies can interact. And we wrote a lot about this in our article on lovers and cheaters, because that's why couples fight so intensely, because they have such finely attuned sexual energy. They have that chemistry, and if it's not what have I often said? If it's not sparks in the bedroom, it's a raging grease fire in the kitchen. So, and then we have that same type of affinity with our loved ones, with our family, because we share the same genetics. We were born, in the same, but we are also in the same soul family. So there's such affinity, there's such synchronicity there, that when the heightened emotions are happening in the negativity, the egos start to kick in, then we start triggering each other on those metaphysical levels, and that's why the conversation becomes so intense. And if we're all part of the same soul family, there's a very good chance that the intensity, the irresistible force that we feel inside of us, pushing us and our position, is reflected in our loved one or our spouse or whatever it is, whoever it is around us that we share that affinity and synchronicity with. That same irresistible force is expressing itself through them, possibly through ego. But if they're in our soul family, the same underlying thread, the same ray of the irresistible force of Christ will be shared among everybody in that soul family. That's what a soul family is. Just to go and get some comments here. Benjamin says, I understand what you're saying about cognitive dissonance. My wife was raised in a religious cult, and despite my efforts to share logical and scriptural knowledge with her, she remains trapped in the programming she received in childhood. I continue to pray for her. And as Azazel says, it's especially hard to communicate when you have nothing going on in your life financially and so on. Oh, well, that's a whole, yeah, when they lend no credibility to your words because you have no money or worldly success to back them up, right? You know, I was in a situation just yesterday with someone. He's a friend of the family. He's one of the most materialistic, empirical people I know. And we were talking about AI and some other things, and I don't want to get into the details, into the weeds, but he was trained to be a physician in Hungary, but that was like what, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, even. I don't know. It's a long time ago, right? And he came to Canada, and he never got his certification because in Canada, the doctors basically have a mafia, and they completely control who can become a doctor, and they artificially keep the number of doctors low, because that way there's more patients per doctor, right? They make more money. And that's called the Canadian Medical Association, that determines how many new licenses to practice that they award each year. And the preference, of course, the first priority is Canadian trained doctors. So foreign trained doctors, if they come in but the Canadian Medical Association have already met their quota for that year, they're shit out of luck. Doesn't matter what kind of accreditation they get, unless they're willing to go to the Yukon Territory or the Northwest Territories, or on some First Nations reservation, or some other place, some remote place where they might have a handful of patients and might make a pittance, and they'll be the only doctor around for like 500 or 1,000 kilometer radius, and and people will they'll have to go and make house calls on snowmobiles in the dead of winter in minus 60 degrees. If they're willing to do that, oh sure, they can come to Canada and be doctors, and they'll be fast tracked to become doctors if they're willing to sign a contract that says that they're willing to go to the Northwest Territories and be a doctor under those conditions for 5 years. That's an aside. So he was medically trained and Hungarian, and so he and my father are friends. And my father has lots of heart problems and diabetes, and he's got lots of problems. And he's going in for this procedure, and he was explaining, and he was showing his friend some imaging of his heart, and he was explaining to his friend that the doctors are hesitant about going through with the procedure because of his weak kidney. He only has one working kidney, and it's kind of weak. It's not functioning at full capacity. And his friend, this medically trained doctor, now yeah, from decades earlier, but whatever, but a very mechanical, materialistic, empiricist, intellectual, materialistic, says, I don't understand that you've got problems with your heart. I can understand that, but what does that have to do with your kidney? And I explained to him, like, what do you mean? What does it have to do with the kidney? It's all one system. It's all one body. You can't perform a procedure on the heart, a medical procedure on the heart. It's an invasive medical procedure. We're talking about removing stents and replacing stents and doing incisions and possibly doing a bypass. What do you mean? What does that have to do with the kidney? You can't put the body through that kind of an invasive process. That's a stressful process. That's a traumatic process to the body. And not only that, to the heart, to the central organ of the body. You can't do that without the body responding by creating a whole bunch of neurotransmitters and endorphins and releasing hormones and all kinds of stuff into the bloodstream in direct response, in direct reaction to that traumatic procedure, especially when you're talking about performing that procedure on an 85-year-old. Now, if he only has one kidney, partially functional kidney, if all those neurotransmitters and endorphins and hormones overwhelm the kidney and other, like, releasing of free radicals and other, like, when you go through physical trauma, the body, it's shaken, it's metaphorically, metaphysically shaken, and it can release all sorts of toxins and all sorts of things that have been bottled up and have been held in pockets of tissues and so on and so forth. And those are released, not to mention energetically. Well, we can't even talk about energy with this guy, so forget about that level of the conversation. Let's just stick with the biochemical, neurochemical level. Now, those neurotransmitters and endorphins and hormones are in the blood. The kidney is going to try to deal with all that. But if the kidney is overwhelmed, if the kidney becomes blocked or overwhelmed, or especially we're talking about very, very potent substances in the body, hormones, endorphins, neurotransmitters. If the kidney becomes overwhelmed, the kidney could shut down. And once a kidney shuts down, there is no restarting it. You can't restart a kidney. You have to go on dialysis. And my father is way too old and way too frail and weak with all of his medical conditions, the diabetes, to be he doesn't even drive anymore. So for him to be taken in an ambulance several times a week to go to a place to be plugged in to do kidney dialysis, I mean, if his kidney shuts down, he dies. That's basically what the doctors are worried about. Now, I explained this to him in very clear medical terms, and he looked at me and he's like, "Ah, no, 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 no. You know what? You know what?" He says to my dad, "Ask your doctors why they're worried about your kidney. Ask your doctors. I want to hear it from the doctors. What can't can't you think for yourself? Is what I just told you not self-evident? Is it not self-evident? The facts? Can't you discern for yourself?" No, no, no. He wants to hear from the doctors. So this is like, as Azil's saying here, it's especially hard to communicate when you have nothing on in your life financially and so on. So I don't have a medical degree. I have no certifications. The medical establishment has not certified that what I have to say is valid in the field of medicine or anything relating to the human body. Ergo, I have no credibility with this materialist, conditioned, intellectual empiricist who he'll believe whatever the doctors tell him, but he'll believe whatever the doctors tell him. And earlier in the conversation, he was waxing poetic about how amazing AI is. And in that part of the conversation, I was trying to explain to him that AI lies around 30% of the time. He wouldn't believe it. He didn't want to believe it. At one point, I just had to get up, and I politely excused myself. I went and I did some dishes. He was coming over, and because my dad's alone, right? My dad's caregiver is away in Europe, and so he came over to spend some time with my dad. And I made them lunch, and so I was able to like excuse myself to go do dishes and stuff. And then I told my dad that there were some more things. My dad and I agreed earlier that I would need to go to the store later, so I was able to excuse myself to go to the store. And on my way to the store, that I realized how physically affected I was by that conversation, by that confrontation, by the irresistible force meeting this immovable object who was just stonewalling me with his complete and total ignorance and arrogance in his ignorance. And and my father's health and well-being and very life hanging in the balance. And he was overruling the truth with his conditioned mindset and his medical training from Hungary from like 40 years ago, or who knows how long ago, decades ago for sure. Um, so as I was walking, I was physically feeling the effects, and psychologically and emotionally the effects of the, let's face it, the fear. I guess there's no other way to put it. Like, why would I allow myself to get worked up by someone who's just like, what is it, right? And the only thing I could come up with is the I was too slow. I was getting caught up in. I was becoming identified and attached to the truth and to the outcome of expressing and sharing the truth. The irresistible force had gone in too strong, too deep, so that when it hit the obstacle, there was too much force behind it for me to recover and remain light and remain at peace and remain playful and sure-footed and light-footed, right? To dance. Because I went in too hard. And when you're in too hard and you get smashed into a wall or get deflected, you're going to lose your balance. You're going to, right? You're not. There's a scene from Highlander, the movie Highlander, when Sean Connery is Sean Connery's character Ramirez is teaching John Connor swordplay, and I'll never forget this line from the movie. He says, "Never overextend your thrust. It leaves you vulnerable and unbalanced." And that's exactly what had happened to me in that conversation. I overextended my thrust because I was facing ignorance. I was facing this wall, and many times our natural inclination is to break down that wall. I'm going to smash through that wall. I'm going to bring the hammer down. But of course, here's what happens when you bring the hammer down. I've got this queued up here. I'm supposed to have this queued up here. There. Okay. Now, I don't know how well this sound is going to work.
You want me to put the hammer down?
Okay, so that's what happens when the irresistible force meets the immovable object, but we go in like Thor with Mjolnir, right? We drop the hammer. That's what happens. We go in with such force that energy, that force gets shocked back at us, and we lose our balance, we lose our footing, we get thrown back, just like that scene when Thor drops the hammer on Captain America's shield, and the vibranium shield repels even the force of Mjolnir, and the shockwaves level all the forest in the area. But there's another way. There's another approach we can take. If we can remember ourselves, and we can remember this other approach, because it's all about speed. Remember that the egos that we're dealing with are like a praying mantis. They're like a mousetrap. They are mechanical predators lying in wait, just waiting for that moment when the irresistible force hits the immovable object. And if we go in like Thor and we have that impact, Thor's all off balance, Thor's flying through the air. It's so easy for the egos to trap him because He's off balance. He has no footing, has no way to defend himself. He's completely vulnerable to the anger, the frustration, the fear, the desire to control, and the pride and everything else that leaps onto that confrontation. But there's another way. There's another way, and we'll get to it in just a second. But we have a couple more comments. Azazel says, "Yeah," he says, "have had heart surgeries twice as an infant. It sure as hell leaves more than physical scars." Yeah, people don't realize, but it's incredible. Someone can be so mechanical and so ignorant. I mean, trained as a physician 30 years ago. So to them, the body is just a machine, right? And it's a machine with parts. And he says, well, if this part is broken, you got to fix that part. Well, this part has nothing to do with the other part. It's like, yeah, sure, you can say that an engine, if you have the problem with an engine, you don't have to worry about the muffler when you're working on an engine. And that's true for cars, but that's not true for a human being. You can't say I'm working on your heart, so I'm going to disregard your kidney. You can't do that. Because the human body is an ecosystem. Human body is not a machine like a car. But when you talk to a materialist, an empiricist, someone who's wholly governed by mechanicity and binary duality, that's the way they think. He's never going to understand, never going to be able to upgrade to human 3.0, trinary human being. Never, ever. In truth, I was casting pearls before swine, and I'm surprised that Benjamin hasn't chimed in yet with that passage from the Bible. But there is something to be said about don't cast pearls before swine. That's another aspect of what we're talking about here. But regardless, sometimes the irresistible force is calling us to engage with these individuals. And maybe they are swine, and maybe we are casting pearls before swine, but it's for a reason. It's serving a purpose, and it's not necessarily for their benefit. But this is where we get trapped. This is where we get we fool ourselves into thinking it must be for their benefit because they're the ignorant one. And we're coming at them with the truth, with the knowledge, with the teachings, or with some revelation. And they're the one who's stonewalling us. So what we're doing must be for their benefit. But that's not true. Azazel says, the fact that the body survives such a procedure is a miracle in and of itself, regardless of age. Yes, that's true. And the self-healing capabilities of the body, we should never underestimate. In fact, on this note, Azazel, it's incredible. My father is probably going to end up being in every medical journal that deals with cardiovascular disease all over the world, because it's incredible. He had these bypasses done in his heart surgery years ago, decades ago now. And his bypasses were blocked. So they went and they put in stents into his bypasses, but then the stents got blocked. And believe it or not, the heart grew new arteries and new veins to get to the heart created its own bypasses. My dad's 85 years old, and this would have happened because he had those bypasses opened up. Those stents were opened up and cleared 18 months ago. So sometime between when he had a heart attack, it was like 18 months ago, maybe 24 months ago, and sometime between then and now, those bypasses that they cleared out got reclogged, and his heart grew new bypasses at the year 84, 85 years old. This is almost unheard of in young people and healthy hearts. But at his age, with such a diseased heart and with all his other medical conditions, it's unheard of. It's possibly never been recorded in medical history that this has taken place. So the doctors over at St. Mary's Cardiac Center, they're preparing their paper, and they've been doing all these imaging and everything else, and they want to do this procedure, but they're going to be documenting everything, and my father's case is going to be possibly the first ever case in the world of this to take place in someone this old. It can happen, and it has happened, but it's very, very, very rare, even in a young person, and a young, healthy person at that. But so that's one thing that this medical doctor friend of my dad was saying, that being that he he does have that training and he is familiar with that industry to one degree or another, and he was saying that that it is almost for certain that my father will be a case study that cardiologists are going to be looking at in the near future, and as an unprecedented possibility that this can happen. That's another aside, by the way. So when we were looking earlier at when you are moving forward and you are answering the call and you are motivated by the irresistible force and the force of that, and you know what that's like. I don't have to describe that to you. Everybody experiences it in their own unique way when they are aligned with and being moved from within by their higher self and by their innermost intimate Christ, that force, that irresistible force. We tend to throw all of ourselves into it. And generally speaking, unless we take it to such an extreme that we make ourselves ill in the process, right? But depending on the situation, even then, I mean, clearly saints and martyrs have given their lives for that force, for the irresistible force. And they've given their lives to save others. And there are many heroes. There are people who, I mean, obviously in war, there have been soldiers who threw themselves on a hand grenade to save their platoon. So sacrifice and self-sacrifice is an aspect of the irresistible force. And that is why we have the Christ, Jesus, and the passion of the Christ to give us like the ultimate example of that. And look at what the nature of Christ is. Look at what Christ is willing to endure for the sake of the end of suffering of all beings. Oh, hello, DFMC. Hello, welcome. It's a new name that we don't recognize. Hope you're still around. But we apologize. We haven't. I did not recognize your comment until now. But when this happens, when we are one-to-one, whenever we come on too strong and one-to-one, and we're stating the truth, the fact, or the knowledge, or whatever, And then we hit the wall. We hit the opposition. We were rebuked. And again, that scene that I played from, we don't have to watch it again with the sound because I'm worried about, copyright. Because as you know, some of these studios, they can be really draconian with this. But I'll play it without the sound. When we go in too hard, too strong, we're so passionate, we're so determined to get through to that other person and make the truth be known. And this is what happens, right? Oops. So what's the alternative? What if in this scene, this is the sparring scene from The Matrix, and obviously in this scene, Morpheus is encouraging Neo to hit him. And this is the scene that's in the thumbnail of today's live stream, right there, right? Without any words, right? But you see, Morpheus is rebuking, deflecting everything that Neo can throw at him. And the question is, Morpheus is doing this on purpose. He wants Neo to hit him. And he tells him, hey, stop trying to hit me and hit me. Don't think you can, know you can. And we've all been here, right? Sparring. But the reason why I'm showing you this scene is that every time Neo is going in to try to hit Morpheus, he's picking a different style of martial arts. He's never going in with a hammer. He's improvising. And even Morpheus says to him, he says, good. Improvisation, you're fast on your feet, whatever. But he goes, how did I beat you? And he says, oh, you're just too fast. You're just too fast. Benjamin says, I just watched The Matrix yesterday for the 1,000th time. There is something to be learned here from this scene. And what we learn, or what we can learn from it, is the recognition that the people in our life who show up in our life who are an immovable object, we can't get through to them. Doesn't matter what we throw at them or how fast we try to be, or how they're just blocking and rebuking or whatever. But they're goading us to try to hit them. like Morpheus, keeps encouraging Neo to keep coming at me, keep coming at me. This is encouragement. This is not blocking. This is not an obstacle. It seems like blocking. It seems like an obstacle. Certainly to Neo, it seems like that and feels like that. It's not for Morpheus's benefit that Neo should hit him. But in life, when we encounter people who represent an unmovable object, the irresistible force, our mystic pride and our fear, our desire to control outcomes, and our fear of letting down our innermost intimate Christ, our fear of not fulfilling our duty as an aspirant and as a messenger of the truth and light, our ego, our mind, our intellect makes it about them. But that's not why they're there. And that's not what the immovable object is for. The immovable object is there for our benefit. The sparring encounter, the sparring match between Morpheus and Neo, for whose benefit is that? It can only be for Neo. It's a training program. Anytime we face an opponent, an adversary of any kind, an obstacle of any kind, it's for our benefit. And that's very encouraging. But what is the nature of the encouragement? Is the encouragement, are we being encouraged to drop the hammer like Thor and lose our balance and lose our cool and get stressed out and freaked out and angry and frustrated? In other words, fall into ego, let those predators pounce on us and become identified and attached and all rolled up and turn it into a big fight? Or are we being encouraged to be quicker, lighter, faster, and quick-witted, and to not commit to every punch as though it was our last punch? And to make it more of a dance, to make it more of a sparring match. Yeah, we want to get through to them, but not at any cost. And we're not committed to any one style. So what does that mean? That means remaining unidentified and unattached to the forms. I'm using that word very specifically now on multiple levels of meaning, because in martial arts, specific martial arts styles are based on a foundation of what they call forms. That's like the underlying foundational move set. It's like the alphabet of that particular martial arts style. They're called forms. It just so happens that, oh, okay, someone is already, Benjamin is already ahead of me here. He's already ahead of me. He says The late great Bruce Lee once said, "Be water, my friend. Be water." He also said, "What? Can you you know what, Benjamin? I will if you're going to jump the gun and you're going to leap in with Bruce Lee, you got to come in. You might as well come in with the punchline. You know the quote that I'm looking for. You got it now. You jumped in. You've now committed yourself. You're now on the hook. I need to know the other quote from Bruce Lee that's going to put a punctuation point on this part of the talk, on this talk of martial arts and forms." So as you watch the sparring match, you see them shifting up the styles and the forms. They're not married to any style. They're not married to any form. They're not attached. They're not identified with any form. You see, look, now the completely different forms. Now, completely different style. All right, let's see. I'm going to keep it playing in the background. Benjamin Ochoa says, "There's a word I've never came across till now. The word is quickened. Didn't know you can use that word quick in the past tense sense." Oh, yes. Oh, yes. That's actually, you can use it in another sense called the quickening. And that's used in the film Highlander, which I've also talked about today. Because in Highlander, when we're talking about sword play and maintaining your footing and not overextending your thrust, that's related to what we're saying now about not becoming identified or attached to any particular form. So let's, Benjamin is coming back with a quote now. Let's see if we got it. Benjamin says, "Be like water, making its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless like water. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. If you put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now, water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend." Okay. So the key word there that we were looking for is formless. Be formless. And why I'm showing you this brilliant sparring match is because Bruce Lee took what is being demonstrated here one step further. The quote that I was looking for, specifically, Benjamin, from Bruce Lee is, "The highest form is to be without form." The highest form is to be without form. That is the formlessness behind Bruce Lee's quotation here about water, and how water can adapt and mold and bend itself to fit and to fill whatever the circumstances are. So if you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put water in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. And sometimes water has to flow, but sometimes water has to crash. Water has all of that capability because it is inherently formless. Here's another good Bruce Lee quote that Azazel shares with us. He says, "My favorite quote from Bruce Lee is, when the opponent expands, I contract. When he contracts, I expand. And when there is an opportunity, I do not hit It hits all by itself. This is, that last part of this quote is basically Bruce Lee saying, I'm not the martial artist. My inner martial artist is the artist. I do not hit it. My fist hits all by itself. I am made a hitter. I do not hit. I am motivated from within to be a hitter, and it happens all by itself. Why? Because I'm responding not in kind. I am not mirroring my opponent. When I am faced with cognitive dissonance and the fear and the anger, I do not mirror that one-to-one. I go like yin and yang. Azazel says, yeah, it sends me shivers. It's so beautifully put. And Benjamin says, you are like Bruce Lee. He acts and speaks from his inner self. So if we approach people and we have the teachings, right? We've heard the teachings, we learned the teachings, like, I don't teach from any books here. I mention quotes here, I mention people there, and I mention the Bible and this and that, and I pull from all these different, because I teach from the book of life, I teach from the book of Thoth, who is Hermes Trismegistus, that I spoke of before, the book that is not bound within any pages or any vellum, was never carved into any stone, anytime in any point in history. It is the living, breathing word of God that is all around us and within us. And we need only cultivate the eyes to see and the ears to hear it. Spiritually, in terms of teaching spiritually and engaging with others and sharing knowledge with others, it is the equivalent of Bruce Lee's Be Water. And the highest form is to have no form. Why is that? Why is that? First and foremost is because the absolute is nothing and God is in everything. But practically speaking, what we are at any given point in time, what we are conveying from soul to soul, from innermost to innermost, is the unformed essence of truth that exists in the world of absolute, in the world of archetypes. Any other expression which is not linked and connected back directly to the world of archetypes is a false expression. And any identification and attachment that we make to any expression, even a valid expression of that universal archetype, if we become identified and attached to it, the individual that we're speaking to may block that particular expression of the archetype. But if we are identified and attached to that form, to that expression, then we will react with ego, with fear, with anger, with frustration, with pride, and say, oh, I'm going to bring the hammer down. I'm going to use this same expression and keep pounding away and bashing away at the wall. I'm going to keep banging my head up against the wall until the wall cracks and the wall breaks. That's identification and attachment to an expression, to a form. But what Bruce Lee is saying, and what the Matrix sparring session with Morpheus and Neo is showing us, is that it said, okay, didn't like that form, didn't like that expression. Well, just step back and go back into the essence. Go back into the formlessness of the truth that you are trying to convey. The formless, shapeless essence. Return to the archetype. Return to the first manifest dimension of reality. The first expression of truth in that particular formless, shapeless, unformed essence of form. And from there, you can express another form, expressing that formless essence. In other words, he didn't react well to the cup. Well, now pour yourself into a teapot form. He didn't react well to the cup. Maybe he'll react well if you offer him some tea in the form of a teapot. Doesn't like that? Well, then maybe pour yourself into a bottle and offer him a bottle. Maybe he'll be more receptive to the water coming from a bottle. Or maybe you put it in a flask, or maybe you put it in a champagne flute, or maybe you have the water flowing out of a hose, because maybe the person's very childish, and maybe he'll be more receptive to the water coming out of a hose. Like when we were kids and we used to be able to drink out of a hose when we were playing outside. Right? If the irresistible force within us is like water, and like the water pressure, the water must flow. Right? The waters of life, like on Arrakis, like on Dune. The waters of life, the water must flow. Like the spice must flow. Because the spice and the waters of life are intimately connected in Dune. It's a very deep, esoteric, allegorical science fiction fantasy novel. It's mythology. Dune is high mythology, like Tolkien. The spice must flow, and the waters of life on Arrakis are. Those are the two things that not only govern Dune and Arrakis, but the whole universe, right? So the water must flow. And why does water flow? If not to quench thirst. Water flows where it's needed. Water flows where it's lacking. It's called osmosis. Right? If you have a concentration of water over here and you have dry desert over there, the water naturally wants to pour from the concentration into over the dry desert where it can be absorbed and do some good. But if the earth is too hard and too cracked, it can't absorb the water a certain way. It needs to be applied a certain way. Maybe the teacup, maybe the teapot, maybe a bottle, maybe the hose, maybe misted. You know, like how you can't water orchids. If you water orchids, they'll die. So you know what you do? You mist orchids. If you put orchids in a bathroom where you shower, or you put spray misters on orchids, or you use you just spray mist the orchid. Oh, they'll be totally happy. Because that's how they absorb the water. They're canopy flowers. They're up in the canopy of the rainforest. They absorb moisture from the air. That's how they can absorb moisture. They don't absorb moisture from the ground with roots. There is no ground and there is no roots up in the canopy. And orchids are special and rare flowers. It's all the same water, right? But what form is the water taking? That's why the highest form is to be without form. to be formless. And I'm facing this right now as I'm preparing more videos to put forth for Attlas Conscious Arts and a 10 for Human 3.0. And saying, okay, well, everything that I've done so far, well, that's fine, that's great, that's good, but now let's do something different. Let's express it a different way. It's the same information, generally speaking. It's the same truth. Humanity has to upgrade from binary duality to trinary, right? It's the same goal. It's the same thing that has to take place. But now come at it from a different angle. Come at it from a different expression. Come at it from a scientific perspective. Come at it from a democracy perspective. Come at it from a economic perspective, financial perspective, education perspective, an artistic perspective, right? All these different facets, all these different angles, all leading to the same truth. Just like the teacup and the teapot and the bottle and the hose and the spray mister, they all deliver water to those who are dying of thirst. For those who are dying of thirst. That is the irresistible force that's within us. The Christ, the innermost intimate Christ. Who is that the manna from heaven that if we eat of his flesh and drink of his blood, we shall live forever. It is the lifeblood of the universe. It is the source energy. And it is the waters of life and the spice which must flow, because if the Christ stops flowing, existence stops. If the prana stops flowing within you, you die. You're dead. Doesn't matter how healthy your physical body is. If your sexual force, your vital energy stops flowing, you die. Your physical body dies. But if the Christ stops flowing, your innermost intimate Christ stops flowing, existence ceases for you. And if the Christ stops flowing, all of reality ceases. The entire universe ceases on all levels, even the seventh dimension. And the Christ only stops to flow at the end of the Mahamantara, which is the great cosmic day, and we go into the great cosmic night. That's when the Christ retreats. It's drawn back into the absolute. It returns all the Christic force and all of the little tendrils and all the innermost intimate Christ tendrils. So it's like all the roots being drawn back in to the trunk of the tree. To use another analogy, if you ever see a sea anemone, right, and just sucks in all of his tendrils. But if we want to be encouraged by those who oppose and object and obstruct us, those who we know need the waters of life, they're dying of thirst. They just don't know it. They don't know it. And because of their cognitive dissonance, they're convinced that I'm fine. I'm not dying of thirst. I'm perfectly okay. You can tell that they're dehydrated and they're dying of thirst. But they refuse the waters of life, which must flow like the spice. The spice must flow. The waters of waters of life must flow. But water can flow or water can crash. And by being formless, by not being attached to any particular form, there's no reason to get upset. It's an opportunity. This person was sent by your Divine Mother to obstruct, to oppose, to rebuke, to challenge, to spar with you. And in the Matrix, Morpheus, the name Morpheus is the god of dreams. And dreams take place in the lunar astral plane. This individual is just dreaming. They're dreaming their reality. You're trying to wake them up in the same way that Morpheus in the Matrix, because this is a simulation in the Matrix, the sparring program, is trying to wake Neo up. And it's for Neo's benefit. We think that we're trying to wake Morpheus up, but Morpheus was sent by our Divine Mother to wake us up. That's encouraging. That's encouragement. Anytime you meet someone who's just stonewalling you, remember this scene, remember this gesture. Remember when Morpheus does that. Come at me, bro. Keep coming at me. But improvise. Stay loose. Remember Bruce Lee. Be water, my friend. And that's encouraging. And that's encouragement. The obstacles, when the irresistible object meets the irresistible force meets the immovable object, that's encouragement. We are being encouraged to be formless, to connect to our formless innermost and the formless essences of form, of archetypes, of knowledge in the seventh dimension, and remain unidentified and unattached to whatever form we put that knowledge in. We are being encouraged to take and draw from the book of Tot, from the book of life, the living, breathing word of God, because God is in everything. The truth is in everything. If the essence, the formless essence of form, the archetypes, are behind all the expressions of those archetypes, then it's almost limitless, the forms and expressions of those archetypes. So why become identified and attached to any one? Okay, couple quick comments. Tiffany says, science is dehydrated. There is a $10 million contest to be won to whomever can show or prove where the first living cell came from. I immediately wondered how to convey the answer to that. How to convey the answer to that lies within the divine spark. They already had the answer, but refused to call it what it is. That's interesting. Tiffany, when the live stream is over, when you have some time, can you send me a link or whatever if there's a place to submit answers? I could use the 10 million. The first living cell Yeah, so no, that would be an interesting conversation to have. Is interesting proof to make. Um, so bringing it back just momentarily, making it personal for me as a case study. Oh, sorry. Before we do that, do you guys remember the movie The Usual Suspects? I'm gonna wait until somebody in the chat comments yes or no, or I want to hear. I need some feedback. If you guys remember the um, now, if you haven't seen it, this is tenuous because people this movie's been out for like what 20 years. Benjamin says that he's heard of it and he remembers it vaguely. Um, Tiffany says no. Okay, so it might not be the best example to use. It's a worthwhile movie to see. It's very entertaining, and it's a worthwhile movie to see because it's an interrogation. Now, Kevin Spacey plays the character who's being interrogated, and gosh, what's the name of the actor who plays the? I can't remember the name of the actor who plays the detective who's doing the interrogating. But at the end of the interrogation, so the Kevin Spacey's playing a cripple. So he's interrogating this cripple, and if you play, I don't want to spoil the movie necessarily, but the ending of the movie reveals an aspect of what I'm trying to get at, and that is one of the great joys of working on videos, for example, or working on those presentations, or reading from the Book of Tot, is that discovering, allowing for what's needed in the moment to show up, and using what's around us. This is why I've told the story before. I used to love making collage, like as an art form. That was my thing, was collage, and found objects and working with what shows up. That's why I really love to do improv when I was on stage in my younger days. Is that, yes, working with scripts, and yes, reading Shakespeare, that was a whole different experience, and that was a whole different thing. But even then, working with what the other actors gave you, and when suddenly new and different and exciting things happened, and you just went with it, you just rolled with it. The cardinal rule of improv is yes and. Yes and. You will have to agree that when it comes to spirituality, specifically religion and religiosity, people tend to have a no but attitude. When you're trying to speak to them and they're conditioned and they're identified and attached to their certain forms and their understanding of spirituality, you're trying to expand their consciousness, expand their awareness and scope, but they're so rigidly holding that anything you say to them, they're going to be like Morpheus, blocking and deflecting, because they're locked into that form. So you need to be able to be like the water and find the cracks in their form, and like flow in, find your openings and flow in. It's not an aggressive thing. You're not smashing their form. This is why you have to be the improviser. You have to be flexible. You have to be like water, because they are most likely going to be like Thor. They're most likely going to be like, you know what I mean, rigid and inflexible. So you can be flexible. So when you're speaking to a Christian, you work with, you hear them out, you hear where they're coming from, and you work within the constraints that they're working with. In other words, you speak their language. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. And I've often said God works with the clay that he's been given. God works with the clay that's thrown onto the wheel, in other words. God doesn't say, no, I don't like that. The divine potter doesn't say, I don't like that clay that's on the wheel. Take it off and put a different piece of clay there. No. But it's wrong if you get this little lump of clay on the wheel to say, oh, but my knowledge is this, demands this vast vase. Well, you're not going to get a vast vase out of that little piece of clay on the wheel. So make it a little cup. It's just another expression of what Bruce Lee was saying. You know, flow into the cup, be the cup, flow into the bottle, be the bottle, flow into the teapot, flow into the big vase if that's what they have, flow into the huge vat, flow into the swimming pool, be a swimming pool if that's what's called for, if that's what's needed, or be a garden hose. What is it going to take to deliver the waters of life to that individual who's dying of thirst but doesn't believe it? They think they're already saved. They think they're already in the ocean. I encourage you to recognize that the obstacles that we face are encouraging you to expand your horizons, to be more flexible, and to let go of your identification and attachment to what you know, what you think you know, and how you think you know what you know. And return to the formlessness, the essence of what you know. So that as much as we love Bruce Lee and Bruce Lee's quotations, I can talk about when in Rome, do as the Romans do. And when you're speaking to, when you're speaking to someone who only speaks Spanish, then try to speak Spanish to them, or try to find the common ground that you can communicate to them in a way that they will understand. Right? Don't speak Norwegian to Brazilians. And if you're that identified and attached to Norwegian and you believe that the truth can only be expressed in Norwegian, well, then stay in Norway. But the reality is that when we go out into the world, we're going to face every different type of person. And what we need now is a unifying codex, a unifying teaching, one that can bridge gaps and heal wounds, and like water can flow into any reservoir, through any crack, through any that's free flowing and can adapt, that's formless, and yet can quench the thirst of a population who's dying of thirst and dying of dehydration. But it should be encouraging to you to know that I can very easily say exactly the same thing that Bruce Lee was saying about the teacup and the teapot, and the bottle, by using my potter and clay on the wheel analogy. And I can describe a triune human being many, many different ways. I can use a bicycle as an allegory, but that's not the only allegory. The creative law of three is in everything. The masculine and feminine and its union is in everything. The triangulation and the triangulation, triune nature of the Trinity and of the Holy Spirit is in everything. So allow other versions, other expressions to come to you. Whatever it is that you're trying to explain to someone and trying to get across to someone, if you only know it through that particular form in which you know it, you're going to be hamstrung. And if you're going to become identified and attached to that one single form. Meditate instead on the essence of the form, the formlessness of the truth that particular form is expressing. And then you can express it any number of ways. And that's what being blocked, when someone is blocking a certain expression, that is what they're encouraging you to do. That's why you have to remember the scene with Morpheus and Neo. Because Morpheus, by blocking Neo's every attempt to hit him, Morpheus is encouraging Neo to become better, to become the one, in fact. And that's the whole key, because Morpheus deep down knows that that's what he needs. That's what everybody needs. They need Neo to become the one. But there's only one way he could become the one. He has to be encouraged. But the only way he can be encouraged is to be blocked, obstructed, rebuked, sparred with, denied. Every attempt that he makes to get through. It's the same thing that I've shown you many times when it comes to water, because we want to stick with the water analogy. Dealing with someone like that, dealing with a difficult person who's refusing to hear you, refusing to anything that you try, it's not working. You're just not getting through to him. Not getting through to them. I bring up this visualization time and time again. If I can bring up this visualization, why isn't it not opening up? Oh, I know why, because Microsoft recently updated its image viewer program, and now it doesn't open up when it minimizes. Okay. Anyway, right? Life is baffling. And baffles make water structured living water. These are the obstacles. These are the immovable objects. And the flow of water, the waters of life, the flow of life is the irresistible force. And it's as water hits these obstacles and goes into the alm of life, into some kind of downward spiral, what's being dissolved there? Why the downward spiral? What needs to fall into the downward spiral, if not the identification and attachment to the form? And in the process, something is becoming structured. The water itself is becoming alive and structured, is becoming better water, more capable, more refreshing, more alive, more cleansing, more everything. So in life, every obstacle we face, every obstruction like that, is encouraging us, like Bruce Lee did, to be more like water, to be more flowing, to be formless, like God is formless. He is the essence, the genius, the love and the light and the force behind all the forms that we see and experience. If you want to be closer to your higher self and closer to the truth, you have to let go of all identification and attachment with all form. So know the essence of Christ. Let go of, like, so you know how many people obsess over what Christ looked like, of what Jesus looked like, and there's this whole movement around how that the common view of Jesus is actually some whatever Machiavellian person's cousin or nephew or something or other, and that there's a whole camp that says that Jesus was black, another camp that says that Jesus looked like this, and that Jesus was looked like this Jewish and that Jewish, and this dark and that dark, and long hair and not long hair, and beard and no beard, and they're all completely missing the point. They're so hypnotized and ignorant that it's ridiculous. They have no idea of what the Christ is. They really don't. They're so identified and attached to form. They'll never accept that Jesus can be born, right? Like Samuel and Wayor said, Jesus can be born 1,000 times in Bethlehem, but if he's not born in your heart, if the Christ is not born, the innermost intimate Christ is not born within you, then you don't have Christ in your life, and you don't have Christ in your world, and you will not be saved. The Christ will not save you. Visit the Gospel of Thomas. It says one of the Gospels. It's might not be one of the four Gospels, but maybe it's Luke. I can't remember which Gospel it is, or it's one of the Gnostic Gospels. It says, "If you bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will save you. But if you do not bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will destroy you." That is the nature of Christ. That is the nature of love, severity, and mercy. We live in a universe of consequences. The waters of life must flow, like the spice must flow. Let them flow into the world through you. But to do that, be formless. Don't go into the world with a 10-pound German beer stein, smashing it into people's heads. I speak from experience how wretched and how horrible and how terrible a result that is. And what that doesn't work. Dropping Thor's hammer doesn't work. Bruce Lee was right. Morpheus is right. Be water, my friends. And I tell you that it's encouragement that we need to be that. Why? Because form gives us comfort and security. It is our false self. It is the mortal part of us that craves identification with and attachment to form. It's the false self within us. It's the mortal who can't let go of form, who can't let go of their hobby horse about what Jesus's eye color was, and whether he had a big Jewish nose or a small European nose or an Egyptian nose, or long hair or short hair, or beard or no beard, or what color of his skin was. That's a human 2.0 concern. That is a binary, mechanical, intellectual concern. That is a, oh, white Jesus does not compute problem. Human 3.0, to a human 3.0, Jesus could have been a midget, a red-haired midget, who, and Mary, his mother, strangely was a red-haired Irish woman that gave birth to a freckled face, midget, red-haired Christ. The human 3.0 doesn't care because it doesn't matter. Because we go with the flow. It's the allowing. That doesn't mean you go with the chaos and you go with the egos and you go with the sin and you go with doing whatever the crowd is doing. No. But you adapt and flow where you are, understanding, being aware of your environment, being aware of who you're speaking to and what they believe, and et cetera, because water too has to be aware as it flows and becomes the teapot and becomes the cup and becomes but encouragement, the root word is courage. Our false self clings to form like a drowning man clings to a life preserver. Because it's fear. And that's the cause of cognitive dissonance. So one of the reasons why we are triggered so easily by those who are blocking us, because they throw up all their defenses because of their cognitive dissonance. That's their fear. So naturally, and their rigid identification and attachment and rigid grasping and desperation with the primal self-preservation instinct, grasping and holding on to for dear life to the forms, to their beliefs, to their dogmas, to their conditioning. And that's what they're throwing up. That's the energy that they're reacting to us with. And that's the energy they're projecting. And they're filling our field, the morphogenetic field, with that energy of fear, of clinging to form. And if we're not aware of that, if we're not conscious of that, if we're not observing ourselves, as our back gets up and we get aggressive and we get forceful and say, I'm going to bash through this obstacle with what? With these forms that I'm identified with and I'm attached to and I know is the truth. And we become just like them. Just like them. Now we're butting heads. That doesn't mean you can't disagree with anybody. That doesn't mean, right, you can't be, apply necessary force here and there. Because remember, water can flow or water can crash. Water can move quickly, water can move slowly. Water can spray mist or water can be, like you look at your shower head and all the different settings on your shower head, right? That's all still water. Okay, so in the improvisation, in the formlessness of form, you're open to all of these possibilities. But what you shouldn't do is be married to the one way. And that's, no, water balloons. I'm going to keep throwing water balloons at his head until he gives in. That's a silly example, perhaps, but it's poignant because some people do that, right? They go through life and their religiosity, their spirituality is just them carrying around water balloons and throwing water balloons at people, hoping to share the waters of life from their perspective, the truth, by throwing water balloons. And that's all they got. They were baptized with water balloons. They grew up studying water balloons. They read from the Bible of water ballooning, and that's all they know is water balloons. And their whole family, their 6 generations of their family grow rubber on rubber plantations. They grow the rubber for the balloons. Right? It's kind of like that. You don't want to be like that. Trust me. It's going to relieve you from a whole tremendous amount of grief and suffering. And it will help you to no longer be insufferable if people have judged you insufferable at times because of how passionate you are in your irresistible force and desperately trying to help people and desperately trying to get them to drink. Because remember, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. There's another old saying that comes into play when we're talking about all this this encouragement and overcome your fear and of having the safety net, of having the solid foundation of form to stand on, or like so many Gnostics, they stand on the foundation of what Samael Envoyeur said. And I was completely rejected. I was completely ostracized and thrown out of basically 2 Gnostic schools because I dared to follow my innermost, who taught me to teach from the book of Thoth. I dared to say a truth that Samael would agree with 100%, but I dared express it in a way that was novel and new, that was not found in any scripture or was not found in any books by Master Samael Envoyeur. Who the hell am I? How dare I? So you'll run into that too. But I had no fear of that. Right? It's just, and I have no fear of, it doesn't matter. The people who come at me and say, you have no credibility, you have no credentials, you have no degree, you have no this, you have no that, you haven't studied, right? You don't have a PhD in theology. You don't have a PhD in metaphysics. I was like, yeah, good. good. Because heaven forbid I go and study philosophy or something else and get my head crammed full of forms and crammed full of what other people said and be limited to that. I have the book of Tot. That's what I can read from and teach from and draw from and sculpt with and paint with and reorganize into a new mosaic, into a new collage, and make of it anything and everything that is required in the moment in an improvised way in order to communicate to the people and who need to see and need to hear. My purpose is to show, and the show must go on. And that's what I have been encouraged to do, and that is the encouragement that I live in and live with. It's still a learning process, but as I learn and as I come to greater knowledge and greater experiential knowledge around this, I share it with you. And that's why you come here, because I'm an open book. Like the world around us is an open book. I have no secrets, I keep no secrets. We are beyond the time of secrets. And the other beautiful thing is that in short order, members of Gnostic schools and other organizations, they might become rounded up and taken away, like persecuted, like they have in the past. I can't be persecuted on that basis because I have no dogma. I have no cult. I have no followers. I have no church. I only have the truth. I only have the book of Tod, which is life. How are they going to pin down anything that I've said and say that, oh, this is this banned belief and that banned belief? How are they going to do that? They might make me disappear a different way, but that's a different story, and that's another conversation. Okay. Tiffany says, just sent the link. You're going to love this shite. They've tagged it as Evolution 2.0, Bridging Life, my words. And wait till they get a hold of Human 3.0. Boom. If you win, I charge a referral fee. Mugaboo22 says, the brain and intellectuals like to occupy themselves with such trivialities. Yes, that's correct. And he also says, the true question is, if billions of humans claim to be followers of Christ, why do we have thousands of different denominations that each claim to have the truth? Well, there you go, because they're all attached to specific forms. And well, that's a you know what? That's a very complex and long and storied discussion, but it can be reduced to the following truth: that because of the law of entropy, everything breaks down, and everything that was whole and united breaks down into its multiple parts. So it's inevitable that because as I explain also in the video, that binary duality, the nature of mechanical nature, is to divide and conquer. So how do you divide and conquer? You divide and conquer exactly by what you've just described here. Because once there were one group of Christians, then they became two, then they become four, and then because they keep splitting. And if you keep dividing and conquering, and then you get those tribes fighting against each other, like in Northern Ireland. For how many years, how many decades were the Protestants and the Catholics killing each other in the so-called Troubles in Ireland? They're all Christians. They all claim to be followers of Christ. And yeah, Christians killing Christians. One might even be able to sympathize or understand, why Muslims and Christians didn't get along, or why Muslims and Jews don't get along, right? But Christians and Christians, Catholics and Christians, or Presbyterians and Protestants, or whatever whatever combination. Yeah, no, you're right. But that's divide and conquer, and that is the way of binary duality and binary mechanicity in the mechanical mind that finds hobby horses, right? Bugaboos, widgets to latch onto it, to identify with, and become attached to, and say, because of this, I don't believe what they believe over there, because of this one factor. Like, so for example, Protestants, the right to divorce, or the right to do this, or the right to do that. Like, Catholics don't do this, but then Protestants do that. So Catholics don't allow for birth control, but Protestants do, and all this kind of nonsense, right? It's all self-serving tribal stuff. And then because of that, they say, well, we're different, right? And they're different over there. Us and them, divide and conquer. Mugaboo says, it shows me that as humans, we are lost, and clinging to a denomination doesn't make one more righteous. So let me read that again. It shows me that as humans, we are lost, and clinging to a denomination doesn't make one more righteous. No, of course not. It makes one more identified and more attached. Just demonstrates one's fear and desire to control the narrative. Because if I can control the narrative, and if I cling to my attachments, and I can get others to cling to the same attachments, then misery prefers company, and I can get the validation of being part of the in crowd, or being part of the majority. Like, how can I be wrong if the majority believes what I believe? Right? These are the ways in which fear seeks to control us, by getting us to rationalize in order to soothe our fear. Tiffany says, it's why I don't join any school. I'd be tossed out at some point. No matter when they say all thoughts are welcome, they experience, no, they don't welcome that. So it's why I don't join any school. I'd be tossed out at some point. No matter when they say all thoughts are welcome, they experience, no, they don't welcome that. Yeah, so it is what it is, right? It is what it is. And look, I had an ex-girlfriend who told me once, she said, I'm married to Ajax. She said, you have to understand, I'm married to Ajax. So, and she really was, that really was her purpose. Like, Ajax, as much as it's, from a certain point of view, it's become a little fanatical, a little cult-like, but from the perspective of it's bringing gnosis to so many people who would never otherwise be exposed to it. So you have to take the good with the bad, and nothing is perfect. And I know for a fact that that was her mission and purpose in life. So, and in many cases, so Tiffany said, I meant my experience, not their experience. Okay, that makes more sense. So in my experience, no, they don't welcome that. And the reason why they don't welcome that, Tiffany, is because we are loose cannons, and we are we rock the boat. And when someone's trying to run a school or organize a religion or whatever the case may be, and trying to keep their congregation showing up and sticking to the narrative and sticking to the plan, again, as the Joker would say, the last thing that they want is somebody coming in and questioning the authority of their chosen savior or their chosen prophet because they have a different way of expressing things. You know, that's a challenge to their authority and the way that they do things, and they don't like that, right? Finally, Benjamin says, true followers of Christ don't kill in any way because Christ taught to love your enemy. The devil kills and lies and is the father of it. For by and large, that's true. True followers of Christ don't go to war, don't go out of their way to start wars or whatever. So, and Tiffany says, what is Ajax? I know you're not referring to the cleaner. Oh, it's not Ajax, it's Ajax. I'll spell it for you. There, that's Ajax. And they're always changing exactly what the acronym means. So the anthroposophical Gnostic. Oh, sorry, no, okay. So the actual letters, if you read them in correct order, you got to do it in Spanish, I believe. So this is right from Google. Okay, let's see what happens if I. Yeah. So this must be the latest. So the Geophilosophical Association of Anthropological and Cultural Studies is a humanistic, philosophical, and anthropological institution. So it's, again, what exactly it stands for is Geophilosophical, Anthropological, the Association of Geophilosophical and esoteric and anthropological. Here it is. I'm not going to try to figure it out here. It's on the screen. Okay, AJAC, Geophilosophical Association of Anthropological and Cultural Studies. Okay. Now, AJAC was started by one of the students, and he claims to be the protege of Master Samael and Veyor, and he calls himself Master Kwenkan. And his, what was his other name? Oh gosh, I can't remember his regular name, but he calls himself Master Kwenkan, and he claims to be Master Samael and Veyor's favorite student or protege or whatever, and that Master Samael charged him with the task of building the army of world salvation, and that after he disincarnated, right? So Master Samael and his wife, Little Antis, began the work, and that Master Kwenkan claims that Master Samael passed the torch over to him, and that he's been charged with it ever since. So, oh, Tiffany says, I found it, no matter. Okay, good. All right, we're all good then. Listen, everyone. it's almost 5:30, and I've got to go and prepare some dinner for my father, who's got to take some medication. He has to take it with food. So, if it's all right with everyone, I'd like to encourage you to, as Benjamin shared with us earlier, the words of Bruce Lee. And as the other Benjamin said, he watched The Matrix for the millionth time or the thousandth time. He said, remember that fight scene from The Matrix. Remember what Bruce Lee said about being water. Remember what running into baffles and obstacles does to water. And remember the power of formlessness, of shapelessness. And that being that way means we don't identify or attach to anything that we say when we say it. Because whatever we say, just let it go. The moment it leaves your lips, be like letting it go off to see its fame and fortune in the world, and with no attachments to how it lands or where it lands. Because if you're connected to the formless essence behind that form, then that's all that matters. You can get rejected 1,000 times and still come up with new ways of expressing the truth. And you will keep expressing the truth in new and interesting and exciting ways. Or you will decide that, no, you know what? I did my best. I tried my best. I was encouraged to be like water. I was like water. I did better than I've done in the past. But now I've learned all I can from this person, from this obstacle. Now I'm going to just flow right around them and go on my merry little way downriver. Right? So don't get caught up. Don't get stuck. Don't get caught in like a whirlpool going around and around and around and around and around and around and around. Just keep flowing. Because remember, you can lead a horse to water, can't make it drink, and all the rest of it. Benjamin says, thank you for today's live stream. I learned a lot of new things today. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Benjamin. For everybody in the States, it's Canada's Thanksgiving this weekend. So that's another reason for us to sign off just a little bit early, because just in case there are other people doing Thanksgiving Sunday, we don't want to leave it too late. Even though Benjamin's in the different time zone, but that's all right. Benjamin, did you get your book yet? Let me know. Tiffany, I shipped your book. I don't know when you're going to get it, but I want to thank you all for coming out in spite of last week's snafu. But as you can see, everything happens for a reason, and that there is that last week's incident actually formed the foundation for this week's topic, and that the two things were intimately connected. And so being water and going with the flow and rolling with the punches and all the rest of it, right? To be aware and awake and conscious and recognizing all the benefits that everything that happens to us, and that the obstacles. So even the fact that the I'll give you guys an update on the campaign next week. I'm not going to get into that now. It's going because it's going to lead to another half an hour long discussion, and we just don't have the time for that today. Benjamin says he got the book, and he says thanks for the swift delivery. Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for the donation, Benjamin. It was a very generous donation on your part. So, to all of you, thank you again for being here today. I look forward to seeing you next week. If you do remember or do recall, to share the video or share the website, atlas.ca, with anybody or everybody. Share it, put it on your timelines, on your social media, on Twitter or X now. I won't be able to do this alone. I can't do this alone. I'm not necessarily asking, for all kinds of donations for you to run and donate more money or whatever. No, I'm not asking that. I'm not asking for direct. Just share it. Just that will help immensely, because in your circles or other groups that you're in, spiritual groups or whatever, or anytime that you're, on YouTube and you watch a video that's on a related topic, or a video that's talking about how bad everything is, or the world is going to hell in a handbasket, or the problems with AI, or the problems with this, the problems with that, you can always chime in the comments and say, well, the problem is, we're stuck in a human 2.0 paradigm and we need to upgrade to human 3.0. Go to www.attlas.ca to see a practical plan for helping humanity to make this critical upgrade, right? And all you got to do is leave a quick comment like that and leave the link in the description, or leave or leave a link to the YouTube video, and that'll help immensely, because even if the person who made the video doesn't see it, other people reading the comments might see it and they say, that sounds intriguing. I might look at that. I might check that out. So it's the only way this is going to work is if we try to, tell two friends and they told two friends, and so on and so on and so on. And that's going to take some time, but it begins with you. Tell two friends, right? That's all I ask. So thank you all. Tiffany says, excellent live stream today. Thank you, brother. Thank you, Tiffany, for being here. And thank you also for your generous donation. And like I said, your book is in the mail. I just don't know when it's going to get there. I don't know what the U.S. Postal Service is like. So thank you all. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a wonderful week. If you are in Canada, happy Thanksgiving. And all that remains to be said is our sign off, as always, inferential peace. Take care, everyone.